And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio. This is episode number 32 of Assembly Call Radio, and it is our 324th episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of Thursday, June 22nd, 2017. I'm Jared Morris, your host for the Assembly Call and for Assembly Call Radio, where each week we break down the most important IU basketball stories from the past 7 days. And remember, once the season starts, you can catch us immediately after every IU basketball game on the Assembly Call IU postgame show. Watch us live at assemblycall.com. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just go to assemblycall.com/YouTube. And if you can't catch one of our shows live, you can always catch up with our podcast. Just search for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts, and you will find us. All right, let's begin how we always begin, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment. This was not the most eventful week, obviously, with Indiana basketball news. And so I think really there's a couple moments that stood out for me. One is OG Anunoby getting invited to the green room for the NBA draft. It is always a good thing to have a presence at the draft, obviously, if you're a program that wants to recruit on the level that Indiana does. And so having OG in the green room as one of the top prospects was a great thing to have happen for Indiana. But when we talk about current players, again, without a whole lot of news to go off of, the one thing that I saw this week was encouraging was a workout video that the Indiana Twitter account posted. It was the latest edition of what they're calling Cliff Notes, and that is kind of workout videos with Cliff Marshall, Indiana's new strength and conditioning coach. And I thought it was really interesting. He walked Indiana fans through a workout that he was putting Deron Davis through. And number one, Deron looked noticeably svelte in the video, which is good. Archie Miller said he's lost 17, 18 pounds, and you can really tell in this video. But it was interesting, the workout he had Deron doing, which was running on an underwater treadmill, which was cool to see. I'd never seen anybody do that before, but talking about how it really helps to ease the pressure on the joints and on the knees. And when you have a guy, even a slimmer Deron Davis is still a big guy carrying a lot of weight, and we have seen enough Indiana big men in walking boots that we're always kind of scared of that happening. And so anything that can be done to help improve Deron's conditioning and his strength without putting a whole lot of pressure on those knees and on those joints is going to be a good thing for his health going into the season. So that was encouraging to watch from the guy that I think we all agree is one of the most important players heading into next season. So hopefully that is another step in Deron getting in shape and getting ready to have the big season that we all know he is capable of having. All right, well, let me introduce my esteemed co-host for this episode of the Assembly Call. Ryan Phillips could not be here this week. He actually laminated a piece of green construction paper and wrote Ryan Phillips' draft prospect on it in hopes that he could finagle his way into the green room for the NBA draft. It didn't work, not surprisingly, but he decided to stay and heckle John Calipari anyway, so he's doing important work right now. But here with me, my partner in crime on another off-season edition of the Assembly Call is one of the world's most respected bracketologists, the president of the Robert Johnson Fan Club, and someone who is quickly gaining a reputation as the Gino Auriemma of girls' youth sports in Cincinnati. He is Andy Bottoms. Andy, you've been away for a few weeks. It's great to have you back. What is your Bottoms line from the past month in Indiana basketball?
Yeah, it's funny, having not been here, you would think that there would be a lot that I could talk about that's going on, but I feel like that's, other than missing you guys' company, I don't know that I missed too many important topics. I think everybody's kind of getting to the point now where you're just waiting for really anything to happen. All the roster stuff, I think, has really played itself out at this point. I think if that extra scholarship was going to be used, it feels like we would have heard about that by now. You get bits and pieces of the schedule, but you're waiting for the entirety of the non-conference schedule to come out, but you don't have that. You're kind of, from a recruiting standpoint, just hearing names, but it's not a time when people commit. So it's just kind of that, weird dead period where there's not a whole lot going on. So definitely excited to be back, and I think we got some good things to talk about. Certainly, it hasn't stopped the inflow of Twitter questions, which is good for us for doing the show. But just in terms of, there's nothing really concrete to latch onto at this point, and so I think some of the workout stuff that you mentioned is interesting to look at, and I think particularly interesting as you really start to put that in the context of the freshmen who are there, and really starting to see those guys get into that and how important that is. And I think you talk about Deron Davis. It always felt like last year he was playing catch up a little bit from missing the time that he did early on. So, a positive, if you really want to, search hard for one, is that all those guys have been there, have gotten there in the last couple of weeks and have been able to get started on that program. And I think that's important, because I do think there are opportunities for each of those guys to carve out a role on the team, while probably not as a starter. And so I think the more that they can get acclimated to being on campus, to what being in the program is all about, the better chance they're going to be able to contribute when the schedule actually does come out and the games get started.
Absolutely. And I can't wait to see when the schedule does come out so we can see what the rest of the non-conference schedule will look like.
I just want to plan around the Mississippi Valley State game. Is that too much to ask?
Yes. I know. We all wait for that game. So despite not a lot of news this week, we still have a jam-packed show for you. So we're going to jump right into our Twitter Q&A here in just a minute, because we did get some great questions, some new ones and some different ones. So those will be fun to answer. And then we have something special planned. And on some of these slower weeks, this is what we're going to do, is kind of take a fun topic and debate it. And so this week, we're going to take a look back. There's not, obviously a lot new to look forward to right now. So we're going to take a look back and look at the 10 most important players from the Tom Crean era. And I think there'll be a lot of good discussion and debate to come from that. So that should be a fun topic. All of that and more coming on this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio. First, before we jump into our Twitter Q&A, a quick word about this week's sponsor, SeatGeek. As you know, buying tickets to sports and concerts can be complicated, but there is a better, simpler way to buy, and that is with SeatGeek. SeatGeek is the smartest, easiest way to get tickets to live events. With SeatGeek's seamless mobile experience, you can buy and sell tickets in just 2 taps. SeatGeek helps you find the best seats at the best prices, fully guaranteed. There's nothing quite like seeing your favorite team or musician in person, and SeatGeek will get you closer to the action for a great value. I actually have the SeatGeek app on my phone, and it is by far the easiest way that I have found to shop for tickets. It's what I use when I'm looking for tickets, because I can be anywhere, and with just a few taps, I can instantly find seats, as I did earlier this year to go watch Yogi play here in Dallas. And the reason why I use it is because SeatGeek is designed to make your ticket buying experience easier than ever. They save you time and money by searching multiple ticket sites to compare prices and find amazing deals so that you don't have to. And best of all, our listeners get $20 off of their first SeatGeek purchase. Just download the SeatGeek app and enter the promo code ASSEMBLY, ASSEMBLY today. That's promo code ASSEMBLY for $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. All right, you are listening to the Assembly Call. I am Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms talking IU basketball. And Andy, let's jump into our Twitter Q&A. And again, we got some interesting questions. Let's hit Chris's question first because it kind of mentions Tom Crean. We're going to be talking about the Tom Crean era a little bit. And this is a really interesting question. He says, with the high expectations with Archie Miller, will failing to meet expectations disappoint or upset the fan base more so than under Tom Crean? What do you think about this one?
I mean, I would say no. I think that similarly, it almost implies to a certain extent that the expectations were somehow different for Crean than they are for Archie Miller. And I don't know that that's necessarily the case. I think the other piece to look at there is kind of how they go about chasing those expectations. And I think we've already seen, just from a demeanor and approach, whatever you want to call it, that they're going to go about reaching those expectations and ideally exceeding them in different ways. And so I think that to me becomes a bit of the difference. I think people started to be more upset with Crean. They certainly gave him a lot of rope at the beginning. I think Archie will probably have less rope because it's starting from a far less dire position. But I think, those expectations, I think we're always there. And I think some of the things that with Crean that did get the fan base upset or disappointed were in some ways the way he went about trying to reach the expectations and not necessarily just failing to meet them.
I agree. I mean, look, the expectations are ridiculously high right now. Part of that is because Archie Miller is a blank slate, and the Archie Miller era at IU is a blank slate, so everything seems possible. But I would just urge you to think back to, right after Christian Watford's shot goes through, and, you've got this team that seems totally ascendant. You've got the movement coming in. You've got all this recruiting momentum. I mean, everything seemed possible at that moment. Indiana was back, and then going into the next season, the #1 team in the country with another great recruiting class coming in. So expectations were as high as they could possibly be. And so I don't think it's really a case of the expectations necessarily being higher right now for Archie Miller than they were under Tom Crean, or it being any more disappointing if Archie fails to meet those expectations than Tom did. We just now have the full benefit of hindsight with the Tom Crean era, and knowing that despite some of those great highs, there were obviously other lows that came with it that ended up proving to be Tom Crean's demise. But I think what we need to get back to with Indiana basketball is kind of the standard being the standard, regardless of who the coach is. And if you fall short of that standard, it's not really dependent on the coach, whether it's more disappointing or not. It's just that we fell below the standard. And so there's a lot of renewed optimism now for Archie Miller. He seems like the right guy at the right time to move us forward. But if he doesn't, and if he fails to meet those expectations, as Tom Crean did after certainly, raising them after those rough first 3 years, then I think it'll be just as disappointing as it was, last year, and how disappointing it felt in 2014 and 15 as well.
Yeah, and I think the other couple things to add to that, one, the recruiting is going to play a big factor in that. Much has been made of the inside out recruiting approach and recruiting the state. That was a big reason of frustration for people. And I think it's too early, even in the 2018 class, to really make that a big point of contention. But I think as you start looking at future classes, I could see people starting to get upset about that. But again, I think from an expectation standpoint, getting some of the 2018 kids from Indiana would be great. But I also think people sometimes can downplay the importance of really being in on these kids earlier than he has had the opportunity to be. And so I think being able to get any of them, I think would be important. And the other is really just looking at the on-court product and the kinds of things that, the team is able to do. If you see the team making strides defensively, but maybe they just don't have quite the guys to execute the scheme that he wants. I don't know that that's true. That may prove to be, a foolish notion, but I think that's the other thing to look at is, can you see little things on the court that show that they're transitioning to a different system, a different style, the kinds of things that Archie Miller has talked about that's gotten fans excited. If you start to see some of that, even if the wins and losses don't add up in the very beginning, I think while I said earlier, there's not going to be nearly as much rope for him as Crean got. I do think those are some things that will pacify people in the short term, and they probably should. Again, to be able to say that he assembled this team in the image of what he wants it to be is clearly not the case. And I think him being able to mold the set of guys that he inherited and kind of re-recruited, if you will, into something that looks like the vision that he's laid out for the program, I think will be a really good step if that can happen as early as this next season.
Yeah, agreed. All right, let's save the rest of these questions for the next segment. So come back on the assembly call. We will continue answering the questions that you sent us in via Twitter. That is next as we move forward on today's episode. All right, excellent. That was 13 minutes and 7 seconds.
All right.
So hey to everybody watching live on YouTube. So you may have noticed that we did not mention the draft. Part of the reason for that is because the radio recording that we're doing right now is going to be going on tomorrow. And it's kind of awkward since we don't know yet where OG is or where Thomas is going to be. So we can't really comment on that, even though when people listen to this tomorrow on the radio, that will already have happened. So the advice that we were given from the great Kent Sterling was to just not mention it, rather than sit there apologizing for how we recorded it last night and all that stuff. So that's why we're not talking about it. But in between segments here, we'll mention it. And if OG gets drafted while we're doing the show, then we'll probably talk about it real quick on the radio show too, which hopefully he will. What's the latest?
They just had Bam Adebayo went 14th, I want to say. I'm seeing Minnesota is taking Justin Patton 16th, which means I missed one somewhere in the middle. Justin Jackson went 15th.
Yeah. Okay, so no OG yet. Hopefully by the time we take our next break, he will be there.
He is the best available according to Jay Billis when that flashed up. And then it looks like Milwaukee taking DJ Wilson at number 17 from Michigan.
Oh wow.
He really skyrocketed up there. Although I was impressed with him over the course of the season and thought what he did would probably play well in the minds of NBA folks.
And it indeed appears to have done just that.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so let's do these next few questions. Do you have opinions on the one about like the USA under-18 team or whatever that I think Calipari's coaching? I might want to wait on that question because I don't know a lot of the background there.
I mean, to me, is it any different than like Coach K being a part of, coaching USA basketball? I mean, it's not coaching the players, but it's giving, well, even, I mean, to a certain extent it is, his exposure to those guys. I don't know. I mean, I think we can talk about how those things matter if you want. I don't have a ton of the background either in terms of how guys get selected to do it. But I mean, we've seen coaches go and take positions to coach other countries' teams and different things. Like Calipari did it in Puerto Rico or somebody, basically to get Karl Anthony Towns. But something with that. I mean, to me, I guess I would fall under the side of it that, I mean, in this case, people are using any advantage they can, and you got to look at it the other way. As if somebody presented Archie Miller with the chance to do that, would you want him to turn it down? No, you'd want him to do it. I don't really.
Yeah,
it does.
I guess the question is, should the opportunity even be there in the first place for anybody?
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's hit these.
We can talk about it if you want. I mean, we can see how long we go on the other ones, and then go from there. And then, as far as the recruiting one, I mean, I've kind of got some of the, major names. I know less about the 2019 guys for sure, other than Keon Brooks and Trendon Watford and all that. I don't really know a ton about the other guys, but
yeah, I don't know a ton about them either. We'll kind of briefly hit that one too. So this segment can be kind of short because I don't think we need to spend a ton of time on those, and then we can hop into the fun top 10 segment.
Yeah.
Okay, let me actually, I'm going to open up something real quick. I have this in front of me. Open up the recruiting board.
Yeah, I would try to do that as well. Like, it's got a lot of 2018 guys on it. They don't have a 2019 one.
Yeah, I mean, 2019 still seems so far away.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go.
I've got up the 247 one. They do have a 2019 one, and the two that they have like as targets that have anything more than like they have team interest. There's warm and cool. The only two guys that are warm are Watford and Brooks, and maybe we can kind of preface it that way or something.
Yeah,
or I can do that when I bring it up.
Okay, yeah, you can do that. Okay, let's do this. Ready?
Yeah, let me mute this real fast.
All right. Oh, wait, I should double check that recording and make sure that it recorded. I always like to do that.
That's one way to do it.
It's good. We're good. Okay, here we go. All right. Cool. You're listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here talking IU hoops with Andy Bottoms. Andy, we've got a few more of our Twitter Q&A questions, so let's hit those before we jump into our next segment where we're going to run down the 10 most important players from the Tom Crean era, which should be fun, and we want to save plenty of time for that. So let's hit these. This question comes to us from Kyle. Which of Archie's assistant coaches is most likely to get a head coaching job after this season or next? I would answer this question by saying Bruiser Flint. I mean, I think he's a guy who clearly, at least it seems to me, wants another head coaching position. He coached for a long time at UMass and at Drexel, had a lot of success, conference coach of the year a few times, made some NCAA tournaments, and, took a step back last year, was not coaching, and, just went around and saw different practices. That's when he infamously said that, Tom Crean's practice was, the best one that he saw. And so, I think he was a great get for Archie Miller. I think he's going to help in a lot of ways, but I don't think being an assistant coach was kind of the next destination job for him. So he would be the guy I would think. Obviously, Ed Schilling has previous, head coaching experience, and you've got Tom Ostrom as well. But Bruiser Flint would be the guy to me that I would guess. I mean, it's just kind of a wild guess just based on what I've kind of read and seen from those guys. What do you think, Andy?
Yeah, I probably would lean the same way, although I think Ostrom is an interesting one who has, been with Miller for a while, but he's also, been an assistant at some other high major programs at Arkansas, at Florida. And so I think that would be, maybe the less obvious one. We see so many times that guys get jobs, it feels like only because they had, well, maybe not only because, but one of the main reasons is because they've already had another job. And so maybe that's what gives Flint the edge, as you said. has that head coaching experience, seems to want to get back into it. I would also be surprised though if a guy like Ostrom, who's been, an assistant different places for, the better part of 10 years, doesn't have aspirations to do that. And maybe is just kind of waiting for the right opportunity. But, to be able to be an assistant at 3 places, within major conferences, I think is a good one. So that might be a little bit under the radar. I think Schilling would be the least likely in my eyes. It feels like he may or may not have had opportunities to do that in the past, but probably at this point for him, doesn't necessarily feel as much like a direction that he would want to go. So I would tend to agree with you with Flint, but I think Ostrom, maybe there's a better chance of that than people may give credit for. I think with Flint, if we're looking at just after this very next year, he's probably the more likely, but the Miller has a couple good seasons. Ostrom is a big part of that. 2 years down the line, maybe he becomes the guy that would leave as well.
Yeah. To Chris's question, do you think college coaches should be able to coach high school kids? This has an unfair advantage. They can recruit a player while no one else can. I think what Chris is referring to is like John Calipari coaching Team USA. I think it's the under 19 team or under 18 team, one of those. What do you think about that? I mean, that, this strikes me as one of those things, obviously if it's not your coach that's getting the opportunity to do it, you kind of look at it and it's unfair and you don't like it. I think if Archie Miller had that opportunity, it would probably be something we'd all be very excited about. But I think the real question is, regardless of who's doing it, and if it's your guy that has that position, do you think that should be allowed? Is that fair? For a guy like Calipari to get that opportunity, even, for Coach K to be able to coach Team USA, because obviously there's a built-in advantage there. There's no question. And I have to assume that it's a pretty political process with who gets those positions, although I really don't know the background on it. So I agree with Chris that it's unfair, but I can't say it's something that I'm really going to get too worked up over, like it shouldn't happen or it's a big deal. I've never really lost sleep over it, I guess.
Yeah, I would largely fall in the same camp. I think with, again, to use the Calipari thing as an example, I would question that, these guys already who he's, the level of guys that he's recruiting on a consistent basis, how many guys he's getting drafted in the NBA every year, the kinds of success he's had with those one and done players. I guess I question that if I'm a player and I've got an offer for Kentucky, is being around him in that other setting really pushing me over the edge, or have I already made my mind up because I kind of know what I'm getting myself into? Maybe gives a little more, personal time with him, or the ability to see, how he might run different practices or things like that. But quite honestly, you go see that on an official visit. You could go see that different ways. So I also wonder if it isn't one of those things that feels like it's a huge advantage. And maybe it would be almost just the level at which he's recruiting is almost different than what everybody else is doing. So to a certain extent, I wonder if it matters versus like if you had a coach who was, a level or two, kind of below where he is from a recruiting standpoint, and all of a sudden they started to do that. But quite honestly, they were getting top recruiting classes every year before he was doing any of this. So is that really going to make a big difference? I guess I question that it is, but definitely could see how people would be upset by it. And like you said, if Archie had the chance to do it, I would certainly be thrilled. So it's hard to, kind of ride both sides of the line there and say what I think is right or wrong.
Okay, our last Twitter question here. This is from Kix Milla. Out of all the 2018, 2019 recruits, who do you think we have the best shot at getting? Now, we will cover this quickly because we don't spend a whole lot of time diving deep into recruiting. We could just, kind of play to the base here and just say, let's see, Romeo Langford, Keon Brooks, Trendon Watford, just list off the names. And I would say, obviously, guy like Romeo Langford, it doesn't seem likely. Indiana doesn't really seem to be in any kind of leadership position in that one. So I'm not holding my breath on that one. I am interested. I'm intrigued at Indiana's chances with Keon Brooks and Trendon Watford. I think the Brooks recruitment is interesting because I think Michigan State was kind of out in the lead there and Indiana wasn't even in the picture, and they are now. And obviously, didn't seem like Trendon Watford had a scholarship offer before, which seems crazy, but he does now. I feel like Indiana's in a pretty good position with those guys, and obviously Archie has an extra year to build that relationship. So those guys seem interesting. And then I think when you start talking about who do we have the best shot at getting, whenever you're talking about the 5-star, top 30, top 40 guys, you're going up against other heavy hitters there. And we obviously want to see Indiana compete and win some of those recruiting battles. But in terms of best shot, you start looking at guys like Robert Finney, who is a really good point guard, being recruited by a lot of the local schools, and is more likely than a guy like Darius Garland, who I think, it seems like Indiana's probably in third place for him behind Duke and Vanderbilt based on everything that you hear. So I think it's great that Archie's swinging for the fences. You have to. Hopefully we land one or two of those guys. But I think the ones that we have the best shot at getting are the Robert Finneys and Race Thompson, who I think visited Bloomington this weekend. Brandon Johns, another 4-star guy. Maybe a guy like Eric Hunter if Indiana decides to offer him a scholarship. So I think those are the guys we have the best shot at getting. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't still swing for the fences and go for the 5-star guys too.
Yeah, I think it's because it has the chance for next year to be a fairly big class, given the number of guys that are there. I think I, as well as a lot of other fans, would love to see a couple of those spots go to the, the Robert Finneys, the Musa Jallos, the Hunters of the world, just to start to build some of that momentum within the state. Now, whether that happens or not, I don't know. I'm certainly not advocating, hey, let's go get all Indiana guys and see what happens no matter where they're rated. But I do think some of those kinds of guys can be 4-year building block type of players. That any IU team that any of us can really remember, you've had some of those guys. And really to be able to kind of build a foundation starting with that class is exciting to me. And hopefully you sprinkle in some of those, one or two of those, higher end guys. Whether that's Romeo Langford in the, Nirvana for everybody, but if, it could be other guys who are there. But I think starting to build some kind of foundation with those kind of guys would be good. And then, sprinkle in some other players and really have some good balance to the class, both from the standpoint of geography, from the standpoint of how long you think they're going to be there and all those kinds of things. I think that would kind of really get the ball rolling in a good spot, and then move on to 2019, where you do, as you said, have that extra year, where you've got the excitement around the Keon Brooks and the Trendon Watford and those kinds of guys who everybody's starting to get excited about already. I think being able to, again, get some guys in and be able to show those guys, hey, we've got foundational guys who are going to be able to get you involved, who are going to be able to do these things. So you get a guy like a Finney as a point guard, as an example, a steady guy at the point who's a distributor, a pass first type of guy. That's something that is going to appeal, to other high end guys. So I think that becomes important in that regard. But those are some of the names that I think would be exciting to see. But to be honest, I don't follow this as closely as a lot of other people. I'm not getting tape like Ryan, so I can't really, I don't really know, what to make of all that. But that's at least my kind of quick thoughts on it.
Yeah, we all need to get tape like Ryan gets tape. I don't
Absolutely.
know. I don't know how he does it.
He probably used it for draft prospects. I mean, just amazing.
I know. He's got a whole just archive of tape in his apartment. Okay, so that was all the questions. Awesome questions. We appreciate you continuing to send them in throughout the offseason. And it's great because you give us, kind of different angles to look at this stuff from. So continue sending the questions. We try and get to as many of them as we can. With those now answered, Andy, are you ready to count down the 10 most important players from the Tom Crean era? Because I think this is going to be kind of fun.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's do it. So coming up on the assembly call, we will count down the 10 most important, not the best, but the most important players from the Tom Crean era. That's coming up on the assembly call. Excellent. So that was 10:35. So perfect. We've got plenty of time.
Right about halfway.
Yeah, we're at 23 minutes, 42 seconds. So we've got a good amount of time to dive into this. So this will be good. So I'll introduce this, talk about just real quick the difference between important and best, just so everybody knows where we're coming from.
Yep.
And then we'll hit the tiers and we'll talk about the top 3. Let's get that out of the way. I think that's going to be pretty easy. I really think the next 2 then are pretty easy, and then we'll get into some of the debates because the debates come a little bit lower.
Yeah, and then we'll kind of see how long that takes us, and then if we want to, I don't even know that at that point, like ranking them even becomes that important. But if we
but some of them, I sat there trying to figure out, whether Troy should be ahead of OG, and it was interesting, kind of going back and forth between the two guys, because Troy obviously played more games and did a lot more things and had huge moments. I mean, what he did against Notre Dame, what he did down the stretch in the Big Ten in 2016 was unbelievable. And yet then, you think about OG and it's like, man, but think about what he did against Kentucky and what he did in Big Ten play. So anyway, I ended up siding with Troy over OG just because he did more, cumulatively did more. But it was, it's interesting to, to weigh quantity over quality with certain guys.
Yeah.
Where that's where the Max Bielfeldt discussion gets really interesting too.
Yeah, that one's definitely interesting. So draft wise, DJ Wilson went 17 in Milwaukee. Pacers picked TJ Leaf. Hawks picked John Collins from Wake Forest. And then I'm just basically like just watching Woj's tweets at this point. There's no reason to, even though I have the draft on, he's like 3 picks ahead. And then it says 20th Sacramento selecting Harry Giles from Duke. So still no OG to hit at this point.
Yeah, well, hopefully he'll get picked soon.
Well, and I think weren't the Nuggets supposedly interested in him, and they traded back to like 24.
Maybe that's why they traded back, because they knew they could get him later.
They knew he was falling, and I don't know. So anyway, yeah, still nothing to hit upon there, but maybe we can wrap up with it if he does get picked before the final segment or something.
Yes,
or we can let it be.
Yes. Okay. Do we have? Okay, cool. All right, this is going to be fun. I'm looking forward to this. And let's see, we've got some interesting in the chat, some interesting comments going on about this too. This should create some good discussion.
All right, good deal.
All right, let's do this. Ready? Okay, here we go. You are listening to the Assembly Call. Remember to go to assemblycall.com/join to activate your free membership. You will get our weekly 6-banner Saturday/Sunday news roundups delivered right to your inbox each Saturday or Sunday, depending on when we get it done, so that you can stay up to date with your Hoosiers during the offseason and even once the season begins. The URL is assemblycall.com/join. I am Jared Morris, talking IU basketball with my co-host on the Assembly Call, Andy Bottoms. And remember, you can join us after every IU basketball game over at assemblycall.com and every week right here for Assembly Call Radio. So, Andy, slower week for Indiana basketball news, so we're going to pull a fun topic out of the hat here and discuss and debate. And this week's topic is the 10 most important players of the Tom Crean era. Now, to begin, just to kind of set the stage and the parameters, I think it's very important that we discuss and define, what we mean by important. And I think obviously going with important is different than going with best. And we did that for a very specific reason, because if you take the 10 best players of the Tom Crean era, for example, you probably have to include Noah Vonleh, because it's pretty, it's inarguable that he was one of the 10 best players in terms of just talent and ability. But was he one of the most important players? I mean, if you remove him, his 1 year from Indiana, is anything markedly different, now in the history of Indiana basketball? And the answer to that is probably no. So I didn't want to get down into that. I think that's a less interesting debate than who is the most important. And to me, how I defined important, Andy, I want to know how you defined it, is, again, if you took that player out, if you removed their contributions, are we now looking back at Indiana basketball differently? Do we not have 2 Big Ten titles in the last decade? Are we losing important games that we won that are, memories that IU fans will have that were important in the history and continuing to build the tradition of IU basketball? So that's how I defined important. Did you have any different definition of it as you were going through?
No, that was definitely an important distinction. As we were emailing about doing this, you kind of called that out pretty early on. So I think it definitely helped to frame a little bit of it up. Although I do think you're selling short the Vonleh thing, because if it wasn't for him, how would we make fun of Ryan for the he's on a 2-year plan thing? So I mean,
but he's one of the 10 most important players in the history of the show.
Okay, all right, that's for another day. That's for another day.
Right, like Stan Robinson didn't make either of our top 10 lists, but secretly, in our personal list, Stan Robinson clearly would have made it, but not, as we did the list this way. So let's start going through this, and I think let's go through it by tiers, because I think as you start looking at this, some pretty clear tiers start to develop, and I don't think really the top tier is that interesting, and it'll be really. It's intriguing to me to see if we'll get any debate over the top tier. I think the top 3, very clear. You've got Cody Zeller, you've got Yogi Ferrell, you've got Victor Oladipo. And I think you could debate Yogi or Victor at number 2. I think that's worthwhile. I put Yogi at number 2 because he's the only guy to win 2 Big Ten titles under Tom Crean. I think he was the greatest example of 4-year player development under Crean. And, again, just look at how Indiana cratered after he left. I mean, that really gave us an appreciation for how great he was. And, I mean, look, Victor was phenomenal. He gave Indiana its swagger and style back. He was the quintessential Tom Crean success story, from under-recruited to first-team All-American and number 2 pick. And you think about some of the amazing performances, like the 19 points, 9 boards, 5 steals he had when Indiana finally broke the hex at the Breslin Center. He was phenomenal. So I think, depending on your own personal criteria, you can probably flip-flop those guys if you want to. But I don't think there's much debate that Cody Zeller is number 1, because when he committed, that kind of signaled to everybody, hey, it's okay to go to Indiana again for, the big name players, from in-state. I don't think Indiana gets Yogi Ferrell if they don't get Cody Zeller. And obviously Yogi Ferrell is another top 3 player. And look, Cody was just a phenomenal college player and underrated in a lot of ways, because it probably was impossible for him to live up to the hype, but he made others around him better. You look at the KenPom Player of the Year rankings, and even though Victor got a little bit more hype in 2013, Cody was number 3, in the KenPom ratings for Player of the Year. Victor was number 9. They were both great, but I think sometimes what Cody did to make other players better that didn't show up in the stat sheet, again, I'm not sure people really recognize that as much as they did. And same thing. I mean, the one common theme with all the guys that are really in the top 5, 6 spots here is look at what Indiana did after they were gone. And obviously Indiana really struggled after Cody left, with leadership and with some of the things that he brought and that a guy like Victor brought too. So I think those are the top 3. That's my order. Andy, I think you agree with the top 3. Did you have them all in the same order?
Yeah, I did. I do think the Zeller one to me was the easiest of the bunch to do that. As you said, I think there's a level of unselfishness with him. And also, so many times over the years that we've been doing the show, and probably people have been doing, long before that, was just, who do you have that what you can expect from on a night in and night out basis? And he was always a guy who you knew was going to give good effort. You knew he was going to protect the rim, grab rebounds, and just play with a lot of energy. And I think that, for a guy of his, not only just his size, but also the acclaim that he came in with, you don't always see that from big time recruits. Didn't want to take any shortcuts, was, willing to do all the right things when he was there. So I think that one, to me, was the easiest one. I did end up with Yogi there. I think just because you look at Oladipo's freshman year, there were certainly some impressive moments, and you could start to see flashes of the ability that he would later show. You didn't know how good he was going to get. But I do think Yogi, even as a freshman, was put in a really difficult position. We saw him do a lot of different things over the course of his time, and a guy that walks out of IU as the all-time assist leader, and 2 Big Ten titles in the 4 years that he had. I think that counts for a little bit more. And so, yeah, I had those as the clear top 3. A bit of a drop off after that, and I had him in the same order as you.
I think the next 2 were pretty clear. Christian Watford and Jordan Hulls, both guys who obviously came in that the first big recruiting class for Tom Crean, his second year. And, again, they kind of brought back some competitiveness. Not that Indiana was great, obviously, their first year, their second year, but, you think about Christian Watford, and the night when he kind of gave Indiana a chance before reinforcements came, the overtime game against Michigan State. And obviously, the Watt shot and just how he developed. And I mean, Jordan Hulls, he brought shooting back to Assembly Hall, and kind of ushered in this new era of Indiana being a team, defined by the 3-pointer, and just helped set the foundation with his work ethic and his attitude, and was, just a really good, steady player. Any argument from you on those guys being 4 and 5? I had Watford ahead of Hulls just because he was kind of the better, more versatile player. But I always kind of think of those guys kind of in the same way.
Yeah, so far it's same order for me as well. And I think there's also, this is where the important versus, talented piece comes in. There's an emotional connection that I think IU fans have with those guys because of watching them endure what they did at the beginning of their careers, and really how big of a role they played in building things back up. I think I think that counts for a whole lot. Certainly in the eyes of fans, I think it's one of those where it's hard to, if you're doing this on raw numbers, and you're, robotic and kind of look through at numbers, I don't know that you do that. I think Watford would still certainly be in the conversation given, what he accomplished on a year in, year out basis. But I think that the kind of emotional connection that everybody feels to those guys adds to it a lot and makes them kind of a tier of their own, guys who really contributed over the course of their 4 years. And again, you kind of see a theme with, at least, 3 of our 5 have been 4-year guys, which, in as things got later in Crean's era, you had more of the one and done, two and done type players. But it's kind of interesting to look that, 3 of those 5 are guys who really we watched grow over the course of those 4 years and do some amazing things during that time period.
So let's give the rest of our top 10 now. I think, top 5 all the same. I think we may have some differences now, and then we can pick out, what'll be some good debates, between either where we have guys ranked or guys that we didn't include. So the rest of my top 10 is Will Sheehy. I thought he, with the Sheila Depot recruiting class, really brought the swagger back. Obviously, his shot against VCU, sent Indiana into the Sweet 16. I had Thomas Bryant at number 7 because he really filled one of the biggest roster holes that was present during Tom Crean's era, and I think had that remarkable freshman season and that signature moment against Kentucky. This is why I'm here. Number 8, I had Troy Williams. He was really up and down. Probably had the talent to be higher, and had those great moments like his performance against Notre Dame, which probably saved the season. And down the stretch in Big Ten play, in 2016, he was fantastic, but obviously held back by some of the bad Troy moments. At number 9, I had OG. I thought his emergence after the Blackman injury in 2016 really helped propel Indiana to that Big Ten title. I thought his defense in the first half, especially against Kentucky, helped make everyone believe that we could win that game. And, look, his injury really derailed any chance that the 2017 season had to get back on track, even though Indiana was playing poorly at the time, and he was kind of struggling after the great performances he had against Kansas and North Carolina to kind of win those games and show the potential that group had. So I had him at 9, and then I had Max Bielfeldt at 10, even though he only played that one season, kind of filled that other big hole behind Thomas Bryant. And, look, saved Indiana's bacon in the Rutgers game, was so important off the bench in Big Ten play, where, again, I think if you remove his one season, I don't think Indiana wins the Big Ten without him. And Big Ten championships are those last. Those, Indiana builds its long-term reputation and tradition in the Big Ten Conference brick by brick with each conference championship. And so I think you get extra credit for playing on a conference champion, and he was an essential cog in that. And so, it's hard to overlook guys like Verdell Jones and James Blackman Jr. and Robert Johnson and some other guys that aren't on the list. But I just think, you take Max Bielfeldt off, you're taking a Big Ten championship off the board. And so for me, I couldn't not have him in the top 10. What was the rest of your top 10?
Yeah, I don't know that I ever really finished rounding out the guys that I had. So I certainly had, and this is maybe where we can get into some of the debate. So the 5 guys that you had were, I basically had 6 guys for 5 spots, I would say. So the 5 that you mentioned, and then Blackman would be the other one from my perspective. With him, averaged at least 15 points a game each of the years that he was there, had some, really good moments, the Kansas game, some of the other games that he kind of put the team on his back. Then you also look at that season where, using your criteria of, well, if you took this guy off, what would happen? Well, you did take him off and you won the Big Ten. So I think that's where that was where that one got a little bit difficult for me. I think from an order standpoint, I don't know that I'd have Sheehy quite as high as you did. I would have him there. I think, again, maybe that's some of that, emotional, subjective type stuff where you really, he and Oladipo coming in together, the unheralded guys who really brought, some toughness. You watch them grow, those moments like the Purdue game when he's, flexing and yelling at the crowd and things like that.
I could be debated down on Sheehy. I think that's probably the one pick that I didn't feel the best about.
So yeah, I probably would have had in some order next Troy and Thomas. I think Bryant, certainly when you look back at his freshman year, was incredibly important. Again, if you think about you're taking somebody off of that team, he was such a big part of what they were able to do. That was a huge hole late into the recruiting period for that team and what that was going to look like. And they ended up adding him and Bielfeldt that you mentioned earlier. And so that was a big one. I think had a disappointing sophomore season, even though numbers wise from averages of points and rebounds got better, displayed different skills, but I think was kind of a point of frustration for a lot of folks. So, but I would have him and Troy in there. I think again, Troy, you kind of had these really high highs and sometimes really low lows. But in the middle there was a guy who, when he was on, took that team to another level. And really, as you said, there were games when he really tried to put the team on his back. That Notre Dame game, even the early second half, I believe, of the North Carolina game in the tournament, kind of showed how dynamic he could be. And while he might not have ever become what everybody hoped he would be, it was another guy who, all this year we were like, somebody needs to play that role, the guy cutting along the baseline and doing those kinds of things. So you look at that. So those would probably be the guys I would have had at 6 and 7. Maybe I'm at Sheehy in the 8 range. OG was another interesting one for me. I think I agree with you in the sense of we saw what happened when you took him off the team this year. And he certainly had those moments last year, but it just feels so incomplete in a lot of ways of what he really could have been. And so, so the biggest debate for me was really probably between, Blackman and Bielfeldt. And I don't know that I ever settled on where I would come down. I definitely, your argument of would that team have won the Big Ten without Bielfeldt, I think is definitely true. And did they win it without Blackman? They did. So maybe that ultimately is the tiebreaker there. Some of the defensive things with Blackman, as we, much maligned from that perspective, but also don't want to downplay a guy who could score the way that he could shoot the ball the way that he could on, a team in this past season that really struggled in some of those areas. So, so I had, like I said, I had those same 5 plus Blackman and kind of in the mix for those spots. And then, Verdell Jones, Vonleh, kind of just because he, was a one and done type guy, was in the mix. Robert Johnson, obviously, I mean, that was a clear number 6. I totally missed the boat on that, but
yeah. How do you not have Robert Johnson?
It's funny though. I was looking back at his stats. I mean, he's averaged at least 8 points a game each year, about 3 rebounds a year. So I think when you look back at career wise, certainly after the season, hopefully has a great senior season and can really build on some of those things. But I think he's probably closer to that conversation than a lot of people would give him credit for, to be fair. Even though I'm a bit of I don't know if you can be a homer in that case, but even though maybe I'm biased to that extent, but I think he probably deserves to at least some honorable mention in that conversation.
So hold the thought on Verdell Jones, because he was interesting to me. And Brian Tonsoni makes a great point in our chat. He says, wasn't a fan of Verdell when playing, but in the years that have passed, really appreciate his career. And I feel exactly the same way. And I'll tell you where I had Verdell when I first went through and made this list. And I kind of changed it. And I'll tell you why I changed it, because he's a really interesting character, I think, in the Tom Crean era. And so I want to talk about that, and we'll get into any other, kind of differences or debates that we want coming up in our 4th segment. So stick with us here on the Assembly Call. We will finish up talking about the 10 most important players from the Tom Crean era here on the Assembly Call. We'll be right back. All right. So that was 1637. So that should give us 4009. So good. That gives us about 9 minutes to wrap this up.
Because we got 50 in total.
30. Yeah.
Okay.
36. I need to start this at 9:15 is when we need to get out. So yeah. So let's open. We'll talk about Verdell. He's an interesting one. A lot of people were kind of tweeting about him too. So what should we hit? Let's hit Verdell real quick. There's not a whole and I think we should just mention some other guys. Like Tom Pritchard deserves honorable mention for the Pritch slap. Yeah, Jeremiah April clearly deserves honorable mention for the turnaround jumper against Mississippi Valley State.
Tijon.
Maurice Creek is he's the great what if of the Tom Crean era. Derek Elston didn't, obviously have the stats, but just the leadership that he provided. Kyle Tabor and Brett Finkelmeyer for being the 2 holdovers. So those guys deserve mention. But again, it's about, if you remove that guy, is something really changing? Something lasting about the IU tradition, and that ends up being my argument for Verdell, because he put up a lot of points and he kind of helped Indiana be competitive when they weren't good. But, ultimately those 3 years, are kind of in the waste bin of Indiana basketball history as it is. Not that the memories aren't important and all that, but when you only have 10 spots, it becomes hard to justify it when the guy individually, his numbers were just okay. And he's actually, his NBA career or his professional career has progressed, I think, a lot farther than maybe a lot of Indiana fans thought it would.
Yeah.
Which is to his credit. And he's an awesome dude. I mean, I love Verdell, but I just had a hard time putting him in the top 10.
Yeah. Yep, that's fair.
Anything on OG?
No, I don't think there have been many picks actually since even as long as that seemed, because they were catching stuff up. Yeah, Terrence Ferguson, I think, is the only other guy that got picked since I last gave the rundown. He got picked 21st by the Thunder. Yeah. Nets are on the clock, so yeah, still no OG at this point.
All right. Well, I hope that my comment about him being in the green room as the banner moment doesn't come back to haunt us if he.
Well, he's still. I mean, technically, that's still true. He's still
in the green room.
He's been the Bills' best available for quite a while, but some of that's based on need and all those kinds of things. So yeah, you'd hope in the next handful of picks he'll get picked, but yeah, definitely not something we're going to be able to hit. Maybe we can on the other part of it after it's done.
Okay. All right, let's hop into this.
All right, Brooklyn Nets selecting Texas's Jarrett Allen with the 22nd pick. So there's another one off the. All
right, so Denver's coming up, so hopefully Denver will take him.
Denver, I think, is 24th, and there's one in between, and I forget who that is. So yeah, I think it'll show up as the Jazz, but I think they're picking it for Denver.
Okay. All right, you ready?
Yep.
Okay, here we go. You're listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris talking IU basketball with Andy Bottoms, and we are finishing up our discussion of the 10 most important players from the Tom Crean era. And there was one guy who didn't make it onto either of our lists, Andy, and that is Verdell Jones. And he's a guy actually that when I first started going through and making my list, I just assumed he would be on it, for just the amount of minutes he played and the amount of shots that he took. And and obviously, look, I mean, he had big moments too. I mean, he was the one who threw the pass to Christian Watford for the shot. That is a moment that will live in Indiana basketball history forever, and he was a big part of it. And I really thought, him getting injured in the Big Ten tournament that year hurt Indiana's ability to go further in the Big Ten tournament. And now, whoever that guy was from Wisconsin that got, ridiculously hot in the Big Ten tournament, that might have happened anyway. And maybe having Verdell doesn't change that. But I thought he really improved and really found his role and found his groove on that team. But when I really stopped to look at it, I didn't want to give Verdell extra credit just because he played on teams that weren't very talented and weren't very good, and he got a lot of extra shots and was kind of a volume shooter and scorer. Because I think ultimately, if you remove his contributions from Indiana basketball, you still have the same number of Big Ten titles and for the most part the same number of big wins, although maybe they don't get the win over Kentucky without him. But I just thought when you only had 10 spots, as much as I wanted him to be in there because I really appreciated Verdell's career and how he was, he was that one guy, that came from Tom Crean's first season, and all the way through to that fourth season when things started to get good. And battled through all of that and has been such a great ambassador for the program since then. I wanted to include him, but based on the criteria that we were using, I just couldn't justify it over some of the guys that were over him that were, I think better players and contributed more to big wins and to Big Ten titles, really in some ways than he had the opportunity to do. And sometimes you need the opportunity as well. But that's why I did not have Verdell in there. Any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think
Verdell.
Yeah, he was one I struggle with a little bit too. I mean, when you look at it from a strictly a numbers perspective, average double digits his first 3 seasons, and I think I even think back to those years, and I think on the Crimson Cast podcast at that time, Galen and Scott would talk so much about he's being asked to do things that he shouldn't be being asked to do, and that was a time when he really, there were a lot of fans that just did not want him playing. Were really hard on him, and it was a case of he was really being put in a difficult position. So I think some of the things that you mentioned in terms of having to take more shots than he probably needed to, having the ball in his hands as much as he had it, and some of the turnover issues that came with that. Like, I think he was asked to do a lot for those teams because you looked around and it was like, who else are you going to ask to do that? And so I think the numbers in some ways are a function of that. But yeah, like you said, you don't want to kind of cut him a break, but I do, part of me was like, yeah, he was a good soldier through those kinds of things and tried to, make the most of what he was being asked to do, even if it was things that maybe from a skill standpoint, in an ideal scenario, he wouldn't have been asked to do. So yeah, that was definitely a difficult one for me. I kind of went into it with the same thought as you, that, yeah, that felt like almost a no-brainer, but then you start to look at other things, and again, kind of using that criteria of if you took him out, how would things have been different? Certainly some moments here and there, a few games here and there, in the grand scheme of things. I don't know that it's all that different, but yeah, he was one I struggled with as well, for sure.
By the way, you'll have to forgive me. The Big Ten tournament losses to Wisconsin are running together for me, but it was 2013 when Ryan Evans went off. But Indiana did lose to Wisconsin.
I think it was Rob Wilson was that guy's name.
Oh, was it Wilson?
Yeah, I think it was.
Whatever. We are not going to go down that road and talk too much about that memories.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Terribly sorry. Okay, now.
Yeah, just let it go. Even if you're wrong, just don't even bring it up again. There's no reason to go back to it. It's fine.
Shut up, Jared. Just shut up. So some other guys for honorable mention that definitely need to be discussed, guys like Kyle Tabor and Brett Finkelmeyer that were the holdovers, and were there for Tom Crean's first season to kind of help bridge that gap. I think Tom Pritchard is an interesting name, and a few people brought him up on Twitter. I mean, obviously he, battled through a lot of losses, had, a memorable moment with maybe the greatest follow-up dunk in the history of basketball with the Pritch slap. A guy that, based on the flurry that he started with, you would have thought that he was a shoo-in for this list is Maurice Creek, probably the great what-if of the Tom Crean era. I mean, if you're going to put together a list of the 10, maybe greatest moments of the Tom Crean era, and maybe we'll do that at some point, I think you'd be hard-pressed to leave his performance against Kentucky as a freshman off of that. Because in a lot of ways, that was really the first time when you said, hey, wait a minute. All right, we got a player here. Indiana basketball is back. We're back to getting elite talent again. I mean, that was obviously before the majorly consequential Kentucky game that would come later. But that performance was transcendent. And, so Maurice Creek, so much potential. And you got guys like Derek Elston, obviously, the Robert Johnsons and other guys like that. I think, the only other guys that really, I think, have legitimate arguments for the top 10 would be Verdell, would be a guy like James Blackman Jr. I think if you squint, you could maybe make a case for Robert Johnson. We talked with Max Bielfeldt on Podcast on the Brink, and he talked about how much Robert Johnson meant to that Big Ten championship team and how he was that defensive bulldog, and so maybe we're underrating him a little bit. But I just wanted to mention some of those other guys, from the Tom Crean era. And obviously you have guys like, Hunter Perea and Jeremy Hollowell and, Stan Robinson and Noah Vonleh and some other guys who had perhaps the talent to be on this list and were important in ways that weren't good. And so I think we wanted to keep this list as important in terms of achievements that are long lasting, not, because of this recruitment or because of this guy's, personal issues off the court, it changed the program in this way. You certainly could have added other guys to a list of important players, but we wanted to keep it more in terms of positive contributions. And so that's why we focused on those guys instead of some of those other ones. We got a couple of minutes left still, Andy. Any final thoughts on this list or any other guys that you wanted to mention or make a case for?
No, I think you touched on the major ones. Yeah, Pritchard was interesting. I was surprised at how much his stats really fell off after that first year. I think it just spoke to how much he was forced to play. Averaged almost 10 points a game his freshman season, and then never more than 4.2 after that. The Creek one was interesting. Certainly just didn't play enough games. But boy, when you look at those 12 games in to his freshman season as a guy who could really score, but you started to envision, hey, when this guy puts some weight on and some of those kinds of things, what could he be? He's 16 points a game at that point into the season. Is just an interesting one to think about. As you said, maybe if we're listing out what ifs of different things, he is absolutely at the top of that list, and what that team and teams after that could have been had he been able to stay healthy going forward from there.
Andy, we have 1 minute left, and guess what just happened as we record this on Thursday evening?
What's that?
OG Anunoby was just selected by the Toronto Raptors. So OG's stay in the green room his wait to be picked is over. He goes 23rd to the Toronto Raptors. Obviously, we don't have a whole lot of time to break that down, but exciting news for OG that he was a first-round pick. And we have a direct quote now from OG Anunoby. That's cool, I guess, is probably something he would say after being picked in the first round of the NBA draft.
Yes, I would imagine. We don't have time for much. We do have enough time to probably interview him about being selected in the draft. In the rest of the show.
In our final 30 seconds, we could probably do a full OG Anunoby interview.
Squeeze in 5 questions and be done. We're good.
Yes, we probably could. So I'm really excited for OG that he's a first-round pick. I think Toronto got, in terms of talent and potential, they absolutely got a steal. So probably just the injury, I think scared some teams. But final thoughts on OG? We got about 15 seconds left.
No, exciting. I think we'll be interested to see how quickly a team really gets him out there. I think there's a lot of work to do with him offensively in addition to his health. So hopefully they don't rush him along and give him time to develop and he can become a productive player up north.
Yeah, that is awesome. Well, good for you, OG. We wish you the best in your professional career. We will certainly be watching. And next week on the Assembly Call, we'll talk a little bit more about the NBA draft and the future for some former Hoosiers. But for now, that is it on this week's episode of the Assembly Call. If you want to see us do the show live and be part of the live chat, join us at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights for the live simulcast of our Assembly Call radio recording, or you can always subscribe to our podcast by searching for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to go to assemblycall.com/join to activate your free Assembly Call membership. Thank you for listening. We will be back to talk IU hoops again with you next week. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers. All right. Good for OG.
Just squeezed it in under the under the gun. Yeah,
I think that's a good spot for him.
Definitely not a place he's going to be asked to. I don't know that he could, quite honestly, go in and, when he's really going to be healthy. But I think it'll be, not a place he's going to be asked to go in and asked to contribute right away. He's on a team that's got a good foundation, at least if they keep Kyle Lowry and figure out what they're going to do. So
yeah, that's awesome.
Certainly worse places and organizations to wind up from that perspective. So
I know. Sometimes, especially for a guy like him that's going to take some time, it's almost better to drop and go to a good kind of a stable organization.
Yeah.
Than get picked early by a team that perennially stinks.
Yeah.
Cool.
There was the Maryland dunk.
The Maryland dunk. That was beautiful.
Yes.
That was beautiful. All right, man. Well, it was good to have you back. We always miss you when you're not here.
Yeah, good to be back.
So let's see what happens next week. If there's anything interesting or newsworthy, we'll discuss that. If not, we'll come up with another fun topic. If you guys have fun, interesting topics that you want us to do, I think we should do top 10 moments at some point because I think that would be interesting.
Yeah. I definitely need to. Yeah, we definitely need to do some work to narrow that down to a list that I can work off of. Because even when I was going through and trying to look at games, I don't have a great memory of a lot of things. But you can kind of go and look at the box score and kind of get back to it. But then I think moments encompasses a little bit more than that. With the Zeller commitment and
here's what would be interesting, right? Like you've got Yogi's shot against Iowa. That gave us a Big Ten title. The Michigan shot that rimmed off. Would you put those higher or lower than the Watt shot? Because that didn't win any titles. It's obviously an amazing memory, but would you put the plays that clinched Big Ten titles over that? I know that's what makes it interesting.
I don't know that I would.
I would have a hard time ranking. I don't know, but
But if you take yourself back, if you take yourself back and without the perspective that you might have now,
I know.
If you took yourself back to how excited you were in that moment at that time, I don't know how you would pick one of the other ones above that.
Well, that's unquestionable, but that's the fun of doing a topic like that is you have perspective now. If it's about the excitement of the individual moment, what other outside of Keith Smart's shot and a couple of other ones, which other ones can even compete with that?
Right.
The April turnaround jumper, obviously. But
obviously that's a big one.
I want to, if I had,
actually was, I don't know what was said because I have the TV muted, but they actually, she milked more time with him than I would have expected based on how succinct he normally is with with his answers. So I'll be interested to go back and watch it. But
if I just had all the time in the world, I would do like some funny editing with the Jeremiah April turnaround jumper and then like superimpose the watch shot crowd reaction after it. It'd just be hilarious.
Oh boy. Well, someday.
It's the off season.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Cool. All right, everybody. We will talk to you guys next week on another episode. Thanks for being here. We always appreciate it.
Well, at least hopefully one thing we can talk about wherever Bryant hopefully ends up going and summer league and that kind of stuff. We might have some updates on that. So that'll be something if the schedule doesn't get released or some of those kinds of things. So
yes. Cool. All right, everybody. We'll talk to you next week.